Right folks, this is just the cover of the actual printing system with the upgrades on the BIBO2 Touch that I have here. It took me a good few days to get everything back in place. So what you're seeing there is the BLTouch and BLTouch mount, which I installed previously in a previous comment. I decided to actually move to the BIBO2 fans. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Just because I'd actually broken one of the extruder heads and thought, seeing as I was taking the entire assembly apart, I may as well replace the fans to get a little bit of extra silence out of it. So this is a print happening on the new BigtreeTech SKR 1.4 Turbo Motherboard. It's running at 120 megahertz, 32-bit, whereas the MKS GEN L stock standard board is an 8-bit board. I'm not quite sure what the processing speed is there. It's a lot more smoother. I've noticed on the benchy prints, I don't know if you can see this, but the layers are pretty much indiscernible. I don't know if I can get any closer than that, but I was well impressed at the accuracy. I stopped it part way just so I could see how it's dealing with bridging. Again, that's the first layer underneath and then the second layer on top. Yeah, I was quite satisfied with that. Before this upgrade, I was struggling with extrusion. I think that was because of my nozzle, but also I think the refined control on the motors, the extruder motors, is helping a bit here as well, which I'll go into. So it is also running the Team C2209s via Europe mode. The steps per millimeter is currently at 128, whereas previously on the MKS GEN L it was running at 16 steps per millimeter. I've noticed just a much smoother flow, especially on arcs and circles. The head is quite capable of handling that quite beautifully. Down here, I'm running the stock standard TFT display by MKF, but big call out to Dark Sprite on GitHub, who we've been working with to get the BigtreeTech firmware ported to this display. It is working pretty damn beautifully. It allows a lot more control from this display. It also allows you to disconnect the display from the motherboard, which is a problem on the MKS GEN L, interfering with my PC prints. Obviously can't show you now during print. The nice thing about the SKR 1.4 board is that you've got multiple serial ports, each with a bit of a different way of being handled. The primary port has been set to the display. There's an auxiliary port which is set to the side. You can see I'm running Octoprint from there, which means that they do not interfere with themselves. Although I still have a performance lag on the Octoprint port, I'm not quite sure why. I need to dig into that. Right, so the displays here, I mean, within print I can adjust the steps, heating I can tweak a bit there as well. Percentage, this is available on the previous display as well. I can increase the speed and flow individually there. Last night I was playing with stopping it and then adjusting the extrusion, LED color, it's not something I have installed yet, fans, and then features, you can mess around over there, but all around much prefer this BigtreeTech firmware over the standard MKS or MakerBase firmware. Right, so that's the one print on the go. It's going to take a couple of hours. I will then flip the box over and go through the upgrades inside. Right, my test print is complete, and I can talk you through the underside of the BIBO enclosure where you can see the new motherboard in place, and I can talk through a couple of points on how I got it in there. Really not a lot of work. This is actually the print that I finished last night. I'm really impressed with the smoothness on the side. This was printed at 100 millimeters per second, so for the speed it is impressive. This top part I bumped it up to 140 millimeters per second, so I think it's got a little bit more of a coarse finish. I'm yet to do another print just to confirm that it is the speed that had that and not something else. So what we have here, you'll recognize the MKS TFT board over there. Stock standard, no other changes. I did need to build a new ribbon cable because the serial port on this motherboard is a 1x5 pin header, whereas the MKS GEN L board that comes with the printer is a 2x5 header. I'm not really sure what the second row was for on the MKS GEN L, but this works fine as is. So there we have the new BigtreeTech 1.4 Turbo board in place. It's a 1-to-1 fit on the underside of your enclosure, with one change. It's the SD card over here is not flush with the PC board, and therefore is obstructed by the case. I needed to whip out a drill and do a bit of DIYing, but there you can see the hole I needed to make to accommodate the SD card and not damage anything. So it's not my finest work, but I was pretty lucky in that it aligned. I aligned it well, and the board just slid right in once the space was there to accommodate it. Many of the headers are where you'd expect them to be. They map to the previous PC board. I am not using the end stops anymore because these are TMC 2209s and they have sensorless homing built in, which I can talk through. I am using the Z end stop for my BLTouch sensor probe over there. The PC board has a dedicated BLTouch port, which you can see down there next to the BLTouch probe port. But for the life of me, I couldn't get that to work in firmware. It's a dedicated pin, it looks configured, but for some reason the Marlin firmware just refused to recognize it even when I specified the sensor pin. So I've moved it over to my ZN stop and it works as it did on the previous setup. So this is the LPC processor, 32 bits, running at 120 megahertz, I believe. Which allows a lot faster control of your steppers and calculations, especially on the arcs. I've got 5 TMC stepper drivers there, TMC 2209. Really great thing, and the main driver for me getting this board is that no additional wiring is needed to get these to work. On the previous board you needed to have custom wires from the drivers to ports for serial communication. This is built in. It even has a built-in diag ports, I can't show you now, on the side of these drivers, which is used for sensorless homing. So they plug right in, as I mentioned in the previous video, running at 128 steps per millimeter. Yeah, operates pretty fine at that resolution. There's an additional Z access port over here if you have 2 motors, which we don't on the BIBO, so it's not being used. Otherwise everything plugs in 1-to-1, very easy. I did move my fans that were hardwired into the power supply, put connectors on them, and I mounted them into the board. The board has fan ports, 3 of them, one there, one below these wires, and the third one over there. No speed control, just straight DC supply, and just for neatness sake I mounted them to the board. The one other aspect of this board which I'm keen to start playing around with is the Wi-Fi control. the port for it lies over here. Well, obviously I won't be able to use that if you recognize the ESP01 microcontroller. This is the Wi-Fi module that BigtreeTech sells. If you have ESP01 boards lying around at home, you can use those. I've experimented with some of these boards that I've had lying in a drawer somewhere. And I'm sorry, I bought a couple more from BigtreeTech, seeing as they're pretty much common. So obviously this is not going to fit due to the enclosure, but I have a 2x4 ribbon cable, I think it is, coming from Amazon, and a header. So I'm just going to have this mounted on the side and have the ribbon cable go into the PC board. So from my reading, it looks like it's straight serial communication as well. And then there's the UI and interface running on the ESP01 chip. So I believe it's just another serial interface to this board. Right now, the LPC has serial comms through the USB header. It's got serial comms for the MKS board. And I am wondering if I can have a third serial port configured in firmware, which I hope so. The other nice addition to this board, which I'll be taking advantage of, is the LED supply. So here is a 3-pin header which supplies a set of NeoPixels and then also a power bridge across the board to power your LEDs. I'm keen to get some NeoPixels into this case. I still have the standard LEDs wired into the power supply. These run on 12 volts, whereas I think this runs on, well, actually I'm not sure what these what this LED supply powers it with, but I thought I'd wait for my NeoPixels before I start experimenting with that. Anyway, that's the setup. Very neat. Took about a day to get the old board out and the new board in. Just remember, please, to label all your wiring before you pull it out. Otherwise, you're going to spend a significant amount of time trying to test and guess what goes where. Or if you want to be lazy like me, I had the two boards right next to each other and I transferred the wires one to one. Before I put it in. Anyway, that's it. If you have any questions, let me know.